moon goddess blessed true mates with bonds stronger than steel, deeper than blood, eternal as the stars themselves. That was the sacred law carved into every werewolf's soul from birth. But when you are an Omega standing before the Alpha King as he tears that bond apart, you learn that even divine gifts can be discarded like yesterday's ashes. The rejection was supposed to happen in the council chamber, a semi-private affair where Melissa would quietly accept Alpha King Reuben's decision and vanish back into the lower keep like smoke dispersing at dawn. The elders had planned it carefully. A clean severing, no witnesses beyond the necessary officials, no scandal to stain the throne. But the Alpha King had other intentions. Standing in the heart of the grand ceremonial hall of Cinderfall Palace, Melissa felt the mate bond ignite in her chest like wildfire catching dry timber. The sensation was excruciating and beautiful all at once, a golden thread pulling taut between her heart and his, demanding recognition, screaming destiny. Every fiber of her being urged her to step closer, to touch him, to complete what the moon had begun. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. The hall stretched vast and imposing around her, its vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadow. Ancient stone pillars rose like the bones of sleeping giants, each one carved with moon phases and the names of kings long dead. Hundreds of silver-flame torches cast flickering light across walls, adorned with tapestries depicting legendary battles and sacred moon rituals. The air itself felt heavy, thick with ceremonial incense, aged stone, and the crackling energy of dozens of powerful wolves gathered in witness. Alpha King Reuben stood on the raised dais before the throne of winter stone and wolf iron, his presence commanding the room without effort. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his frame radiating a warrior's strength, barely contained beneath formal regalia. A black doublet embroidered with silver wolves, a fur-lined cloak clasped at his shoulder, with the royal moon seal. His dark hair fell in waves to his shoulders, framing a face of sharp, unforgiving beauty. High cheekbones, strong jaw, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. Storm gray and cold as winter seas, they looked at her now with something worse than hatred. Indifference, as if she were a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be dismissed, a mistake the moon had made that he would now correct. Melissa knew exactly what she looked like in this moment, standing in the center of the hall, under the weight of so many stares. A lowborn Omega in simple servant's dress, the best she owned, but still plain brown wool that hung loose on her slight frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, no jewels or adornments because she had never owned any. Her hands, calloused from years of needlework and rough fabric, were clasped before her to hide their trembling. She had scrubbed them until her skin was raw. But her Omega scent still clung to her like a brand, soft, unassuming, easy to overlook. She looked like exactly what she was, a seamstress from the lower keep who had been summoned to the throne room to be publicly cast aside. The nobles packed the hall from wall to wall, high-ranking betas in fine velvets, visiting alphas draped in furs and authority, their elegant mates glittering with jewels and perfume. They watched with bright, hungry eyes, whispering behind ringed fingers and silk handkerchiefs. This was spectacle, drama, the story they would retell at dinner parties for months to come. The night the Alpha King rejected his fated mate because she was merely an Omega. Reuben's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade through silk, deep and absolute. Let it be witnessed by all assembled in this hall that I, Reuben Ashenfell, Alpha King of the Cinderfall Kingdom, sever the mate bond thrust upon me without consent or consideration. The formal words hung in the air like a death sentence. Melissa's wolf howled inside her, a sound of such raw anguish it nearly buckled her knees. The bond stretched tight between them, burning, screaming, refusing to break cleanly. She felt it fraying like rope, pulled past its limit, each fiber snapping with individual agony. Heat flooded her veins, not the warmth of connection, but the searing pain of something sacred being torn in two. An Omega, Reuben continued, his tone flat and final, cannot stand beside the throne of Cinderfall. The moon may bind us by instinct, but I am bound by duty to this kingdom. I choose my people. I choose strength. I reject this bond. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Several nobles nodded in approval. A few Omegas near the back of the hall lowered their eyes in shared shame. Melissa felt the moment the bond snapped. It was not clean, not merciful. It was violence. A tearing sensation ripped through her chest, stealing the air from her lungs. Her wolf screamed in a language older than words, a keening sound of loss that echoed in the hollow space where the golden thread had been. For 3 heartbeats, Melissa couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the blinding white agony consuming her. But then something else rose beneath the pain. Something cold, clear, furious. He chose this, her wolf whispered, voice raw but steady. Remember that. Melissa drew in a shaking breath and forced her spine straight. She would not collapse here, would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her shatter. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her gaze to meet Reuben's. For just a moment, so brief she almost missed it, something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or pain. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same cold authority. "You are dismissed," Reuben said quietly. Melissa bowed. Not a submissive crouch, but a single, controlled incline of her head, the gesture of acknowledgement between equals, though everyone in this hall would call her mad for offering it. "As you command, Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady despite the inferno in her chest. Then she turned and walked toward the great doors at the far end of the hall. Each step was measured, controlled, despite her wolf clawing at her insides, begging her to run, to flee, to escape this place and these people and the unbearable weight of their judgment. The crowd parted before her like a sea cut by an invisible blade. Their whispers followed her, sharp and cutting. Poor thing. What did she expect? An Omega with the Alpha King. Ridiculous. At least he had the sense to end it quickly. Melissa kept her eyes forward, her hands loose at her sides. She would not run, would not let them see her break. The great doors loomed ahead, tall and iron-bound, carved with scenes of the first Alpha King receiving his crown from the moon herself. 2 guards stood at attention on either side, their faces carefully blank. Melissa reached for the handle, and felt it. A pulse of light behind her breastbone, faint but unmistakable. Not the mate bond, that was gone, torn and bleeding, but something else, something deeper. Ancient. A warmth that spread through her veins like liquid silver, chasing away the cold emptiness the rejection had left behind. She paused, hand frozen on the door handle, as a voice whispered through her mind. Not her wolf. Something older. Broken bonds cannot be unbroken, it murmured, soft as falling snow. But what was stolen will be reclaimed. What was rejected will return. The moon remembers, little one. And so will he. Melissa's breath caught. The warmth pulsed once more, then faded, leaving her standing alone in the sudden silence. She glanced back over her shoulder. Reuben still stood on the dais, his expression unreadable, but his hand had moved to his chest, pressing against his heart as if trying to soothe an unexpected ache. Their eyes met across the distance of the hall, and for just a heartbeat, Melissa saw it, the flicker of something unfinished, something that refused to die despite his declaration. Then she pushed through the doors and stepped into the cold night air, leaving the Alpha King and his court behind. She did not know, as she walked back toward the lower keep, with silver light burning faintly beneath her skin, that she had just set in motion a destiny neither rejection nor pride could stop. The moon had chosen, and the moon did not forget. The lower keep smelled of damp stone, cheap tallow candles, and the accumulated scent of omegas who had nowhere else to go. Melissa descended the narrow servants' stairs in silence, her hand trailing along the rough-hewn wall for balance. Each step took her further from the grand ceremonial hall, deeper into the belly of Cinderfall Palace, where sunlight never reached and guilt never touched. By the time she pushed through the heavy oak door into the Omega quarters, the silver warmth that had pulsed beneath her skin had faded to a whisper. What remained was the hollow ache where the mate bond had been, a phantom limb still screaming even though it was gone. 3 Omegas looked up from the communal table where they'd been mending linens. Their hands stilled, their eyes widened. "Melissa," breathed Kira, a kitchen Omega with kind eyes and graying hair. "Oh, sweetheart." Melissa closed the door behind her and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. "It's done." "We heard," said Tessa, younger, her voice tight with barely concealed fear. "The whole palace is talking about it. They're saying the Alpha King rejected you in front of everyone, that he called the bond a mistake." "He did." Melissa's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she unpinned her braid. "He chose his throne over the moon's will." Kira stood, crossing the small room to grip Melissa's shoulders. "Are you hurt? Did they—" "No one touched me," Melissa said quietly. "He simply severed it, and I left." "You should have begged," Tessa whispered, wringing her hands. "You should have submitted. That's what Omegas do when what?" Melissa met the younger Omega's eyes. "When our mates reject us. When Alphas decide we're beneath them. When the moon herself is overruled by pride." Tessa flinched. "I just meant you could have made it easier. For yourself." "There is no easy way to have your soul torn in half," Melissa said softly. Then, more gently, "But I know you mean well." Kira guided Melissa to a chair. "You need rest and willow bark tea for the pain." "The pain isn't the kind willow bark can touch." But Melissa sat anyway, suddenly unable to hold herself upright any longer. The other Omegas exchanged worried glances. They'd all heard the stories. Omegas who'd been rejected by their mates and never recovered. Some wasted away. Some went mad. Others simply disappeared, unable to bear the weight of a bond broken against the moon's design. "You're stronger than this," Kira said firmly, pressing a cup of weak tea into Melissa's hands. "You've survived worse." Melissa wrapped her fingers around the chipped ceramic, grateful for the warmth. "Have I?" The words opened a door in her memory she'd kept carefully locked. She was 7 years old, standing in the corner of the seamstress's shop while the head Omega inspected her stitches. "Invisible hands make the best work," the woman had said, not unkindly. "No one remembers the Omega who mends their clothes." And that's exactly how it should be. She was 12, watching other wolves her age discover their gifts: strength, speed, healing. Her wolf was small, quiet, unremarkable. Some Omegas are meant to serve, her mother had whispered before the fever took her. There's no shame in it, Melissa. Just don't expect more than the moon intends to give you. She was 16, walking past a mirror, and realizing she couldn't quite remember what her own face looked like. She'd become so good at being invisible that even she had stopped seeing herself. Melissa blinked, the memories scattering like leaves in wind. She took a sip of tea and tasted ash. I should sleep, she murmured, though she knew sleep wouldn't come. Not with the phantom bond still screaming in her chest. In the Alpha King's private chambers, Reuben poured himself a glass of wine with hands that were almost steady. A wise decision, Your Majesty, said Councillor Aldrich, settling into the chair across from Reuben's desk. The kingdom needs a strong Lunar. An Omega would have been... He waved his hand dismissively. A liability. The bond is severed, Reuben said flatly. There's nothing more to discuss. Of course, of course. Aldrich smiled, the expression sharp and satisfied. Though I must say, you handled it with remarkable composure. Lesser alphas might have been swayed by the mate pull, but you put the kingdom first. Your father would have been proud. Reuben's jaw tightened at the mention of his father. The late Alpha King, assassinated along with Reuben's mother during a failed coup 6 years ago. The memory was a wound that had never quite healed, a reminder that love, attachment, trust could all be weapons turned against you. The council meeting is adjourned, Reuben said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. Aldrich rose, bowed, and left. Silence settled over the room like falling snow. Reuben drained his wine in one swallow and poured another. The bond was severed. He'd felt it snap, felt the golden thread between them fray and break. It was done, finished. So why did his chest still ache? He pressed his palm against his sternum, where a strange, hollow pressure had been building since he'd left the ceremonial hall. It wasn't pain. Exactly. More like absence. As if something that belonged there had been carved out, leaving only empty space behind. An Omega, he reminded himself harshly. Weak, unsuitable, a political disaster. But then he remembered the way she'd looked at him in that final moment, before she'd bowed. Not with tears or pleading, but with something far more unsettling, understanding. And beneath it, a quiet, burning defiance. She hadn't broken. He'd expected her to crumble, to beg, to prove every assumption he'd made about Omega fragility. Instead, she'd walked away with her spine straight and her dignity intact, leaving him standing in a hall full of witnesses, feeling like he'd just made a terrible mistake. Reuben set down his glass and moved to the window. The lower keep was barely visible from here. Just a dim cluster of buildings huddled against the outer wall. Somewhere down there, Melissa was... He stopped the thought before it could finish. It didn't matter where she was. The bond was severed. She was nothing to him now, just another Omega in a palace full of them. But even as he told himself this, Reuben felt it. A faint tug in his chest, like a thread that refused to be cut. Impossible. Rejected bonds died. That was the law. That was how it had always worked. Unless... Reuben's hand tightened on the windowsill. Unless she wasn't just an Omega. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. He pushed it away, turned from the window, and forced himself to focus on the trade agreements waiting on his desk. But hours later, long after midnight had come and gone, Reuben lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling the phantom bond pulse in his chest, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. Somewhere in the lower keep, Melissa was awake too, and the moon, watching them both, smiled. 3 days after the rejection, Reuben encountered Melissa in the torchlit corridor outside the war room. He'd been returning from a tense council meeting about border disputes, his mind still tangled in strategies and supply lines, when he caught her scent. Snow and something herbal. Lavender, perhaps, or sage. Clean and quiet, easily overlooked. But his wolf noticed. His wolf had been noticing for 3 days straight, restless and irritable, in a way Reuben couldn't explain. Melissa walked with her head slightly bowed, arms full of folded linens. She wore the same plain brown dress from the rejection, her dark braid swinging between her shoulder blades. She moved like someone accustomed to being invisible, keeping to the edges of the corridor, her footsteps nearly silent. She didn't see him until she was 10 paces away. When she did, she stopped. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The torchlight cast shadows across her face, but Reuben could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened on the linens. "Your Majesty." Her voice was steady, carefully neutral. She curtsied, the movement precise and practiced. Reuben should have nodded and continued past, should have treated her like any other servant. Instead, he found himself slowing, then stopping entirely. "Are you hurt?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Melissa's eyes widened slightly. "Your Majesty?" "From the—" He gestured vaguely, uncomfortable. "The severing. I've heard it can cause complications for omegas." The words sounded awkward even to his own ears. He'd never asked after a rejected mate before, had never needed to. This was uncharted territory, and he didn't understand why he was stepping into it. Melissa's expression remained carefully blank. "I'm well. Thank you for your concern." But she wasn't. Reuben could see it now that he was looking. The faint shadows beneath her eyes, the pallor in her cheeks, the barely perceptible tremor in her hands. She was holding herself together through sheer will, and something about that made his chest tighten. "You should see the palace healer," he said. "That's an order." "There's no need, Your Majesty. I'm managing." That wasn't a suggestion. Melissa's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then she bowed her head. "As you command." The formal distance in her voice felt like a physical barrier between them. She wasn't being disrespectful. Quite the opposite. She was being perfectly, impeccably polite. And somehow, that was worse than anger would have been. Reuben cleared his throat. "The council meeting went longer than expected. I should—" "Of course, Your Majesty. I won't keep you." She stepped aside, making room for him to pass. But as she moved, her scent wrapped around him. Snow and herbs and something underneath that his wolf recognized with a bone-deep certainty. He felt the phantom bond pulse in his chest, that strange, not quite pain that had been haunting him for 3 days. Reuben forced himself to walk past her without another word. He made it 5 steps before he heard the soft sound of fabric shifting. Felt her presence behind him like a magnetic pull. His wolf snarled inside his mind, demanding he turn back, demand answers, break through that careful politeness, and find the woman who'd looked at him with defiant understanding in the ceremonial hall. Instead, he kept walking. But her scent followed him all the way to his chambers. The next morning, Reuben's head steward appeared with an unusual request. "The ceremonial cloak, Your Majesty. The one you wore during the northern border inspection last month. The hem is badly torn, and there's a rip near the shoulder clasp. It needs mending before the treaty signing next week." Reuben barely looked up from the military reports on his desk. "Then have it mended." "Yes, Your Majesty. I'll assign it to—" The steward consulted his ledger. Melissa is our finest seamstress. Her work is... No. The word came out sharper than intended. Give it to someone else. The steward blinked. Your Majesty, with respect, the treaty signing is in 6 days. Melissa is the only one with the skill to repair ceremonial garments properly on such short notice. Unless you'd prefer to wear a different... Fine. Reuben cut him off, already regretting it. Give it to her. That afternoon, he found himself in the lower keep's sewing room, without quite remembering how he'd gotten there. He'd told himself he was simply checking on the progress of the repair, that it was practical, necessary, that it had nothing to do with the fact that he hadn't been able to focus on anything for 2 days, his mind constantly drifting to torchlit corridors and the ghost of snow and herb scent. Melissa sat by the window, the winter sunlight turning her hair to burnished brown as she worked. The cloak was spread across her lap, her needle moving with swift, precise efficiency. She hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on her task. Reuben watched her hands, calloused, careful, gentle despite their roughness. She worked with a concentration that was almost meditative, her brow slightly furrowed, her lips pressed together. You're skilled, he said quietly. Melissa startled, the needle slipping. She caught it before it could fall, then stood quickly, nearly dropping the cloak. Your Majesty, I apologize. I should have heard you approach. Don't apologize. Reuben stepped into the room, keeping his distance. I shouldn't have interrupted. She clutched the cloak against her chest like a shield. The repair is almost finished. Another hour, perhaps 2. The tear near the shoulder was deeper than it appeared, but I've reinforced the seam so it won't reopen. You don't fear me, Reuben said abruptly. It wasn't quite true. He could see the wariness in her eyes, the tension in her frame. But there was something else there, too. Something that refused to submit, even when her body language spoke of caution. Melissa met his gaze for just a moment, before looking away. I do, Your Majesty. Then why don't you cower? The question hung between them, too raw, too honest. Melissa's fingers tightened on the fabric. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. Fear and submission aren't the same thing. One is instinct, the other is choice. And you choose not to submit. I choose not to let fear rule me. She lifted her eyes to his again, and Reuben felt something shift in his chest. My wolf knows you could destroy me with a word, but she also knows that bowing won't change that. So I stand. Reuben stared at her, struck by the simple truth in her words. She wasn't defiant for the sake of pride or rebellion. She was simply herself. Unshakable in some fundamental way he couldn't name. Your cloak will be ready by evening, Your Majesty, Melissa said softly, breaking the moment. If there's nothing else. Thank you, Reuben said, the words feeling inadequate. Then, because he couldn't seem to stop himself, for your work. It's valued. Melissa's expression flickered with something. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. But she only nodded and returned to her chair, dismissing him as politely as any servant would. Reuben left the sewing room feeling more unsettled than when he'd entered. That night, he dreamed. The moon hung full and silver over a forest clearing. Melissa stood in the center, her brown dress replaced by something flowing and white, her hair unbound and shining. She looked up at the moon, and silver light poured down like water, covering her skin until she glowed. Melissa, the moon whispered, and the voice was ancient, powerful, feminine. My daughter, my gift, my truth. Reuben tried to call out, tried to move, but he was frozen at the clearing's edge. Melissa turned toward him, her eyes no longer brown but silver bright. "You rejected what you didn't understand," she said. "But the moon remembers. And so will you." Reuben woke gasping, his chest tight, the phantom bond burning like molten silver beneath his skin. In the lower keep, Melissa woke at the same moment, her hand pressed to her heart. Moonlight streaming through her window. The bond, impossibly, pulsed between them. Alive. The blizzard came without warning, howling down from the northern mountains like a living thing. By evening, snow piled waist-deep against the palace walls, and the temperature dropped so sharply that frost crept across the inside of windows. The upper chambers, built for grandeur rather than warmth, became uninhabitable within hours. Ice formed on stone walls. Fires couldn't hold against the cold, seeping through ancient masonry. The head steward made the practical decision: evacuate the exposed wings and move everyone to the lower keep, where thick walls and communal hearths could sustain them through the storm. Which was how Reuben found himself sitting by a roaring fire in the Omega's common room, surrounded by servants and lower-ranking wolves who'd never shared space with their king before. And how he found himself across from Melissa. She sat on a worn cushion near the hearth, mending someone's torn sleeve by firelight. Other Omegas clustered in small groups around the room, talking quietly, sharing what food they had. The atmosphere was strangely intimate, stripped of ceremony, everyone reduced to the simple need for warmth and shelter. Reuben had tried to maintain distance, positioning himself near the door. But as the hours passed and the storm raged outside, the room's occupants gradually shifted, rearranged, until somehow Melissa was directly across the fire from him, her face gilded by orange light. She hadn't looked at him once. "Your Majesty shouldn't be here," Kira said nervously, offering him a chipped mug of weak tea. "We can make room in the—" "The storm doesn't care about rank," Reuben said quietly. "This room is warm. That's enough." Kira nodded, relieved, and retreated to the other Omegas. The fire crackled. Wind screamed against the shuttered windows. Someone in the corner hummed a low, soothing melody. Melissa's needle flashed in the firelight, steady and sure. Reuben found himself watching her hands again. They were always moving, mending, creating, fixing. Never still, as if stillness meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling things she'd rather avoid. "Do you ever rest?" he asked before he could stop himself. Melissa's hands paused. She looked up, surprised. "Your Majesty." "You're always working. I've noticed." Several Omegas had turned to listen, their conversations trailing off. Reuben could feel their curious stares. But he kept his eyes on Melissa. She set down her mending carefully. "Idle hands make for a restless mind, Your Majesty." "And what are you trying not to think about?" The question was too personal, too direct. He knew it the moment the words left his mouth. But something about the firelight and the storm, and the strange intimacy of this shelter, made normal boundaries feel irrelevant. Melissa's expression remained carefully neutral. "With respect, Your Majesty, I don't think this is an appropriate—" "Everyone," Reuben said, raising his voice slightly. "Give us the room." Silence. Then Kira stood, ushering the other Omegas toward the adjoining sleeping quarters. They went reluctantly, casting worried glances at Melissa, but they went. The door closed, leaving only Reuben and Melissa, and the fire between them. "You didn't have to do that," Melissa said quietly. "I wanted to talk to you, really talk to you, not with an audience." Reuben leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You can refuse. Tell me to leave. I won't punish you for it." Melissa studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she picked up her mending again, though her hands didn't move. "What do you want to talk about, Your Majesty? Why don't you hate me?" She looked up sharply. "What? I rejected you publicly, humiliated you, tore apart a bond the moon herself created. You should hate me." Reuben's voice was low, rough. "But when you look at me, I don't see hatred. I don't know what I see. And it's driving me mad." Melissa was quiet for so long, Reuben thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "Hatred would mean you mattered enough to hurt me. But you were just doing what you were taught, that omegas are weak, that love makes kings vulnerable, that the throne matters more than the heart." She met his eyes across the fire. "I can't hate you for being what this kingdom made you." The words struck deeper than any accusation could have. "My parents loved each other," Reuben said suddenly, "truly loved each other. My father used to say my mother was his strength, not his weakness, that their bond made him a better king." He stared into the flames. Then they were assassinated. Together. Their love was the weapon used against them. The traitors knew my father would come if my mother was threatened. And he did. And they both died. Melissa set down her mending. "I'm sorry. I was 18, old enough to take the throne, young enough to believe I could have saved them if I'd been faster, stronger, more prepared." Reuben's hands clenched. "I learned that day that love is a liability, that caring for someone gives your enemies a blade to hold against your throat. So you decided never to care for anyone again. I decided to put the kingdom first, always, no matter what the moon demanded. And yet here you are," Melissa said softly, "sitting in the Omega's common room, asking me why I don't hate you. Doesn't sound like someone who's successfully stopped caring." Reuben's breath caught. He looked at her across the firelight. Really looked. At the exhaustion she hid behind steady hands. At the strength in her spine that wouldn't bend even under the weight of rejection. At the quiet compassion that let her see past his cruelty to the fear beneath it. "I don't know what you are," he admitted, "but you're not just an Omega. I've felt it since the rejection. The bond didn't die. It should have, but it didn't. And I dream about you. The moon calls your name in my sleep." Melissa's expression shifted. Surprise, then something almost like fear. "The bond can't survive rejection. That's impossible." "I know." Reuben stood, closing the distance between them without thinking. "But it's still there. Can't you feel it?" He stopped just before reaching her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to catch her scent. Snow and sage and something underneath that made his wolf whine with recognition. Melissa stood slowly, and they were suddenly inches apart, the fire crackling at their backs. "I feel it," she whispered. "I thought I was going mad." "Bonds don't survive. They can't. Maybe it wasn't a normal bond." Reuben's hand lifted, almost touching her face before he stopped himself. Maybe the moon had different plans. Melissa's breath hitched. For just a moment, she swayed toward him, her eyes dropping to his mouth. The bond flared between them, hot and insistent, demanding completion. Then she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "This is dangerous. For both of us." "I know. The council would—" "I know. Then why are you here?" Reuben met her eyes, and for the first time since the rejection, he let her see past his defenses. "Because I can't stay away. and I'm tired of pretending that's not terrifying." Melissa opened her mouth to respond, and gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "What's wrong?" Reuben reached for her instinctively. "I don't. It burns." Melissa stumbled, catching herself on the arm of the chair. Her other hand clutched at her sleeve, and Reuben saw blood seeping through the fabric. "You're bleeding." "I must have caught it on the needle. I didn't notice." Reuben grabbed her wrist gently, pushing up her sleeve to examine the cut. It was small, barely more than a scratch across her palm. But the blood wasn't red. It was silver, pure, luminous silver that caught the firelight and seemed to glow from within. They both stared at it, frozen. "What?" Melissa's voice shook. "What is that?" Reuben's mind raced through everything he knew about werewolf lore, ancient bloodlines, moon legends, and landed on one truth that made his blood run cold. "Moonborn," he breathed. "You're Moonborn." Melissa looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What does that mean?" Before Reuben could answer, the fire flared suddenly, burning white-hot for just a moment. And in that flash of light, he saw silver patterns flickering across Melissa's skin, like moon marks coming to life. Then the moment passed, the fire returned to normal, and Melissa collapsed. Reuben caught her, his heart pounding, her silver blood staining his hands. And somewhere far above, the moon watched through the storm, patient and knowing. The palace healer's hands trembled as she bandaged Melissa's palm. "It's just a cut," Melissa said for the third time, her voice still shaky. "I don't understand why. Drink this." The healer, an older woman named Esme, pressed a cup of bitter-smelling tea into Melissa's free hand. Her eyes kept darting to the silver-stained cloth she'd used to clean the wound, now hidden beneath other supplies. "For the shock." Reuben stood by the door of the healer's chamber, arms crossed, watching every movement. He'd carried Melissa here himself after she'd collapsed, ignoring the stares of servants and guards alike. Now he refused to leave, despite Esme's pointed suggestions that he had more important matters to attend to. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "You recognize what you saw." Esme's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you mean, Your Majesty." "Don't lie to me. The blood was silver. You saw it, same as I did." The healer was silent for a long moment, her hands stilling on the bandage. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My grandmother told stories. Old stories, the kind the council doesn't want repeated. About wolves blessed by the moon herself, wolves whose blood ran silver, whose power could rival any alphas. They were called Moonborn." "Were?" Melissa asked. "They were hunted," Esme said flatly. "Centuries ago. The ruling alphas feared them, feared anything that could challenge their authority. So they hunted the Moonborn down, killed them, erased them from history. My grandmother always said they'd return one day, when the moon deemed it necessary. But I thought they were just stories." Reuben felt ice sliding down his spine. "How many people saw the blood?" "Just us, and I burned the cloth." Esme met his eyes. "But Your Majesty, if word spreads, if the council learns—" "No one learns anything," Reuben said sharply. "Is that understood?" Esme nodded, but her expression was grim. Secrets don't stay buried forever. Especially not secrets like this. The rumors started within a day. Whispers in corridors, knowing glances, conversations that stopped abruptly when Reuben or Melissa entered a room. The king carried the Omega seamstress to the healers himself. Something happened during the blizzard. They were alone together. I heard her blood was strange. Wrong. She's not a normal Omega. Something's different about her. Reuben crushed each rumor he heard, silencing gossips with cold authority. But for every whisper he stopped, 2 more sprouted like weeds. The council noticed. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said during the morning briefing, his tone carefully neutral. "There are concerns about the Omega, Melissa." Reuben didn't look up from the trade documents. "What concerns?" "Some believe she may be afflicted. There are reports of unusual symptoms following the rejection. The healers have been questioned." Reuben's hand tightened on his quill. "Esme said nothing to you." "Not Esme, no. But others have eyes. And the court is wondering why you've taken such a personal interest in a lowborn Omega you publicly rejected." Aldrich leaned forward. "It raises questions, Your Majesty. Questions about your judgment, about whether the mate bond was truly severed. Are you questioning my authority? I'm questioning your priorities." Aldrich's voice hardened. "The treaty signing is in 3 days. Foreign alphas are arriving. This is not the time for distractions." "Melissa is not a distraction. She's a seamstress who fell ill during a storm. Nothing more." "Then you won't object to the council conducting a formal investigation into her background to ensure there are no complications." It wasn't a request. Reuben met Aldrich's eyes and saw the trap closing. If he refused, the council would assume he was hiding something. If he agreed, they'd tear through Melissa's life looking for evidence to use against her, against them both. "Do what you must," Reuben said coldly. "But be careful, Aldrich. False accusations against my subjects won't be tolerated." Aldrich smiled. "Of course, Your Majesty." That night, Melissa woke screaming. Fire, silver fire pouring from the moon like rain. It covered her skin, burned through her veins, lit her from the inside out. She stood in a forest clearing surrounded by wolves, hundreds of them, all watching, all waiting. "You are the last," the moon whispered. "The last of my daughters. Hidden, protected, forgotten. But no longer." "I don't understand," Melissa cried. "What am I?" "Everything they feared. Everything they tried to destroy." The vision shattered, and Melissa jolted awake, her skin slick with sweat, her hands glowing faintly silver, before fading back to normal. Kira was already at her bedside, eyes wide with terror. "Your eyes, they were silver, like moonlight." "It was just a dream," Melissa whispered, but her voice shook. "That wasn't a dream. That was a vision." Kira gripped her shoulders. "Melissa, what's happening to you?" "I don't know." And that was the terrifying truth. Since the cut, something had been waking inside her. Something vast and ancient that she didn't know how to control. "I need to talk to the king." "The king rejected you." "I know what he did. But he's the only one who knows about the blood. The only one who might have answers." Reuben spent 3 sleepless nights in the royal archives, searching through texts so old they crumbled at his touch. Most references to Moonborn wolves had been deliberately destroyed, but fragments remained. Warnings carved into stone tablets, passages in journals written by paranoid alphas, scattered mentions in lunar ceremonies. Moonborn Omegas possess power equal to any Alpha King. Their true mates cannot reject them. The bond will reform regardless of the Alpha's will. They are chosen by the moon herself to restore balance when the natural order has been broken. The words burned themselves into Reuben's mind. He hadn't rejected a weak Omega. He'd rejected the moon's answer to centuries of Alpha tyranny. And she was waking up. A knock at the archive door startled him from his research. He looked up to find Melissa standing in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "We need to talk," she said. "I know." Reuben gestured to the scattered texts. "I've been researching." "Melissa, you're not just Moonborn. You're—" "I know what I am," she interrupted. "The moon told me, in visions, every night since the cut." She stepped into the room, and Reuben saw silver flickering faintly in her eyes. "And the full moon is tomorrow night." Reuben's blood ran cold. "What happens during the full moon?" "I don't know. But the moon keeps showing me fire. Silver fire consuming everything, and I'm at the center of it." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm scared, Reuben." It was the first time she'd used his name. The intimacy of it struck him like a physical blow. He crossed to her, taking her hands without thinking. "I won't let anything happen to you." "You can't stop this. Neither can I. It's already—" Melissa gasped, doubling over. Silver light flared beneath her skin, racing along her veins like lightning. Her eyes blazed pure silver. And when she looked up at Reuben, he saw terror and power warring in her expression. "It's happening," she choked out. "It's happening now. But the full moon isn't until—" The archive window shattered inward as moonlight poured through, impossibly bright, despite the moon being only 3/4 full. The light wrapped around Melissa like living silver, and she screamed as her body convulsed. Reuben caught her as she fell, her skin burning hot beneath his hands. Silver fire erupted from her in waves, scorching the ancient texts, setting the room ablaze with lunar light. "Melissa!" Reuben held her tight, his alpha instincts screaming at him to protect his mate, the bond roaring to life between them, fully formed and undeniable. Guards burst through the door, drawn by the light and the screaming, and behind them came Aldrich and half the council, their faces masks of righteous fury. "Seize her," Aldrich commanded. "The Omega is corrupted, dangerous. She must be contained before she destroys us all." Reuben looked down at Melissa, convulsing in his arms, silver light pouring from her eyes and mouth, and made his choice. He stood, lifting her with him, and placed himself between Melissa and the council. "No," he said. The word echoed through the burning archive like a declaration of war. The silver fire consumed the archive for 3 heartbeats, before dying as suddenly as it had ignited. Melissa collapsed in Reuben's arms, unconscious, her skin still radiating unnatural heat. Smoke curled from charred texts, and the acrid smell of burned parchment filled the air. Aldrich stepped forward, his face a careful mask of concern that didn't quite hide the gleam of triumph in his eyes. "Your Majesty, please step away from the Omega, for your own safety." "She's not dangerous," Reuben growled, tightening his hold on Melissa. "Not dangerous?" Elder Thorn emerged from behind the guards, his silver beard trembling with barely contained fury. "She just set the royal archives ablaze with moonfire. Do you have any idea what that means? I know exactly what it means." Reuben met the elder's eyes. "She's Moonborn." The words fell like stones into deep water. The council members exchanged glances, some shocked, some fearful, but Aldrich and Thorn looked almost satisfied. "Then you understand the danger," Thorn said, his voice dropping to something coldly formal. "Moonborn Omegas were eradicated 4 centuries ago for good reason. They're abominations against the natural order. Their power rivals Alpha Kings, challenges our authority, upends the hierarchy the Moon Goddess herself established." "The Moon Goddess created them," Reuben countered. "How can they be abominations if she blessed them?" The moon goddess also gave us the strength to rule, Aldrich interjected smoothly, to maintain order, to protect our kind from chaos. He gestured to Melissa's unconscious form. Look at her. She can't control this power. She'll destroy the kingdom before she learns how. Then we teach her control. There is no teaching this. Elder Thorn's voice hardened. Moonborn Omegas don't just possess power. They are power. Raw, uncontrolled lunar force given flesh, and worse. He paused, his eyes narrowing. They bond with Alpha Kings in ways that cannot be broken. True mate bonds that override rejection, that reform no matter how many times they're severed. The words hit Reuben like a physical blow. What? You felt it, didn't you? Aldrich's expression turned pitying. The bond that wouldn't die. The pull you couldn't escape. That's not love, Your Majesty. That's compulsion. The Moonborn's power forcing itself onto you, enslaving you through the mate bond. That's not... Reuben started, but doubt crept in. Was that why he couldn't stop thinking about her? Why he'd crossed every boundary, broken every rule to be near her? It is, Thorn said firmly, and it's why they were eliminated. Moonborn Omegas don't just challenge kings, they control them. Through the bond, through their power, through their very existence. An Alpha King with a Moonborn mate isn't a king at all. He's a puppet. Reuben looked down at Melissa, her face peaceful in unconsciousness, silver marks still faintly glowing beneath her skin. His wolf snarled in denial, but his mind raced with terrible questions. Had any of this been real, or was he dancing on strings he couldn't see? The council will take her into custody, Aldrich announced, for everyone's protection, including yours, Your Majesty. No. The word came out weaker than Reuben intended. It's not a request. Thorn's voice was granite. The law is clear. Threats to the kingdom must be contained. And Your Majesty... His eyes bored into Reuben's. If you cannot put your kingdom before your affliction, then perhaps the council needs to consider whether you're fit to rule. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Reuben's jaw clenched. You're using her to undermine me. We're protecting the kingdom from a dangerous anomaly, Aldrich corrected. What happens next depends entirely on your cooperation. Reuben looked around at the council members, at their carefully neutral expressions, and felt something click into place. You knew. Before the mate bond even snapped into place, you knew what she was. Aldrich's silence was answer enough. The timing was too convenient, Reuben continued, his voice rising. The council gathering where we first encountered each other. Melissa never worked those events. Someone arranged for her to be there. Someone wanted us to discover the bond publicly so we could save you from making a catastrophic mistake, Thorn finished coldly. Yes, we knew the girl carried dormant Moonborn blood. We've been watching her bloodline for generations, ensuring it stayed weak, diluted, forgotten. But somehow, it resurged in her. His lips twisted. We couldn't risk you accepting the bond. Couldn't risk a Moonborn Lunar on the Cinderfall throne. So we ensured you'd reject her before the bond could fully form. Except it didn't work. Aldrich's voice held a note of grudging admiration. The bond reformed anyway. True mate bonds always do, when one party is Moonborn. That's why we can't wait any longer. She needs to be eliminated. Tonight. Eliminated? Horror flooded through Reuben. You mean murdered? We mean neutralized. The threat removed, however necessary. Thorn gestured to the guards. Take her to the holding cells beneath the throne room, the ones with silver-lined walls. Her power won't work there. I'm ordering you to stand down, Reuben snarled, his alpha command rolling through the room. But the guards didn't move. They looked to Aldrich instead. Your orders are compromised, Aldrich said almost gently. The bond has corrupted your judgment. Until it's broken, permanently, you cannot be trusted to rule objectively. This is treason. This is preservation. Thorn nodded to the guards. Take the Omega. Now. 2 guards stepped forward to pry Melissa from Reuben's arms. He held tight, his wolf rising with lethal intent, ready to tear them apart. Your Majesty. Aldrich's voice cut through the rage. If you fight us, we'll have no choice but to declare you unfit to rule. The kingdom will fall into chaos. Foreign alphas are arriving for the treaty signing in 2 days. If they sense weakness, they'll strike. Is that what you want? Civil war, invasion, all for 1 Omega. The words were calculated, precise, designed to hit every one of Reuben's fears. He looked at Melissa, unconscious and helpless, then at the guards surrounding them, then at the council members watching with cold, patient eyes. He was trapped. Fine, Reuben said, the word tasting like ash. Take her to the cells, but I want her unharmed. That's non-negotiable. Of course, Your Majesty. Aldrich gestured, and the guards carefully lifted Melissa from Reuben's arms. As they carried her toward the door, Melissa's eyes fluttered open, just for a moment. She looked at Reuben, confusion and betrayal flickering across her face, before unconsciousness claimed her again. That look would haunt him. You're making a mistake, Reuben said quietly, once she was gone. We're correcting one, Thorn replied. Yours. The guards marched through the palace corridors with their unconscious prisoner, their footsteps echoing off stone walls. Servants scattered at their approach, whispers spreading like wildfire. The Omega is being arrested. The king's rejected mate. They say she's dangerous. They say she's Moonborn. In the lower keep, Kira heard the whispers and felt her blood run cold. She'd seen Melissa's eyes turn silver, had witnessed the visions, had known, somehow, that this moment was coming. She ran to warn the other Omegas, to prepare them for what was about to happen. Because when they came for one of their own, even the lowest wolves would have to choose, stand silent or stand together. And in her cell, deep beneath the palace, locked behind silver-lined walls that burned her skin when she touched them, Melissa began to wake. The moon called to her through stone and metal, its voice growing louder with every passing moment. Rise, it whispered. Rise, my daughter. It's time. Reuben stood alone in his chambers, staring at the blood on his hands. Melissa's blood, still faintly shimmering with silver in the candlelight. The council had left him with their ultimatum hanging in the air, like an executioner's blade. Put the kingdom first. Forget the Omega. Prove you can still rule. But all Reuben could see was the betrayal in Melissa's eyes as the guards carried her away. He'd spent 6 years building walls around his heart, convincing himself that love was weakness, that caring for anyone gave his enemies leverage. His parents' deaths had taught him that lesson in blood and ash. But standing here now, with Melissa locked in a cell and the council preparing to destroy her, Reuben finally understood the truth his father had tried to teach him. Love wasn't the weakness, fear was. He grabbed his cloak and strode from his chambers, purpose burning through him like wildfire. The holding cells beneath the throne room were designed to contain dangerous prisoners, silver-lined walls, iron bars, isolation from the moon's light. Reuben descended the narrow stone stairs, dismissing the guards at the entrance with a single command. They didn't dare disobey. Not yet, anyway. Melissa sat in the corner of her cell, her knees drawn to her chest, silver marks glowing faintly across her exposed skin. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and the wariness in her expression cut deeper than any blade. "Come to make sure I'm properly contained." Her voice was hoarse, but steady. "I came to get you out." Melissa laughed bitterly. "You let them take me." "I had no choice." "There's always a choice." She stood, swaying slightly from weakness. "You made yours 6 years ago, when you decided your throne was worth more than your heart. And you made it again tonight." "You're right." Reuben gripped the bars, wishing he could reach through and touch her. "I was a coward. I let fear rule me. But I'm done." He pulled out the cell key he'd taken from the guard station. "I'm getting you out of here. Now." "And then what?" Melissa stepped closer, her eyes glowing faintly silver. "The council wants me dead. Your kingdom will fall into chaos if you defy them. Foreign alphas are circling, waiting for any sign of weakness. You can't protect me without losing everything you've built." "I don't care." "You should." Melissa's voice cracked. "I won't be the reason this kingdom falls. I won't be the weapon they use to destroy you." "You're not a weapon. You're my mate." Reuben unlocked the cell door, swinging it open. "And I should have stood by you from the beginning. I'm not making that mistake again." Melissa shook her head, even as she stepped out of the cell. "Reuben, listen to me. The Moonborn were eliminated for a reason, because we threatened the natural order. Maybe the council is right. Maybe I am dangerous. You felt the power in the archives. I can't control it. What if I hurt someone? What if I hurt you? Then we'll figure it out together." Reuben took her hands, ignoring the heat radiating from her skin. "I've spent 6 years believing I had to face everything alone. But that's not strength. That's just loneliness. And I'm tired of being alone." Tears gathered in Melissa's eyes, the first he'd ever seen from her. "They'll kill us both. Let them try." Footsteps echoed down the stairs, dozens of them. Heavy boots, clanking armor. The guards had finally overcome their hesitation. Reuben moved to stand between Melissa and the stairwell, his body a shield. The guards poured into the corridor, weapons drawn. Behind them came Aldrich and Elder Thorn, their faces masks of cold fury. "Step away from the prisoner, Your Majesty," Aldrich commanded. "No. This is your final warning. We cannot allow a Moonborn to threaten this kingdom." "She's not threatening anyone," Reuben snarled. "You are. You manipulated me, conspired behind my back, and now you're trying to murder an innocent woman because you're terrified of losing your power. We're trying to save you from yourself." Thorn's voice boomed through the corridor. "The bond has poisoned your mind. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 6 years." Reuben's alpha command rolled through the space, making several guards flinch. "I reject the council's authority in this matter. Melissa is under my protection. Anyone who touches her answers to me." Silence fell like snow. Then Aldrich smiled, cold and terrible. "You just made this remarkably easy, Your Majesty. By formally rejecting the council's authority, you've invoked the ancient judgment law." Reuben's blood ran cold. "What?" "It's an old law, rarely used," Thorn explained with barely concealed satisfaction. "When an Alpha King's judgment is compromised by mate bonds or blood ties, and he refuses the council's guidance, he must submit to the moon's judgment. A trial by divine decree." "You're making this up." "It's in the original royal charter," Aldrich interrupted. "Carved into the foundation stone of this very throne room. You would know that if you'd spent more time studying history instead of chasing an omega. Melissa gripped Reuben's arm. What does it mean? A trial? It means, Thorne said, his voice dropping to something almost gleeful, that both of you will stand before the moon goddess's shrine tomorrow at dawn. The full moon will judge whether your bond is divine will or demonic corruption, whether the omega is blessed or cursed. And if the moon judges against us, Reuben demanded, then the omega burns, Aldrich said simply, and you forfeit your crown for defying divine order. The council will select a new Alpha King, one who puts duty before desire. Reuben's wolf snarled with rage, ready to tear through every guard between them and freedom. But Melissa's hand on his arm stayed him. I accept, she said quietly. No, Reuben started. I accept the judgment, Melissa repeated, her voice growing stronger. She stepped out from behind Reuben, facing the council directly. If the moon truly blessed me, she'll prove it. And if she didn't, she lifted her chin. Then you'll have your answer. Melissa. This is the only way to end it without bloodshed, she said, turning to face him. Either the moon confirms what we feel, or I die, knowing you're safe. I'm not letting you. It's not your choice. She touched his face gently, her palm warm against his skin. For once, let me protect you. Reuben wanted to argue, to fight, to burn the whole kingdom down, rather than risk losing her. But looking into her eyes, brown and gold and silver all at once, he saw something he recognized. The same terrible courage he'd admired from the beginning. The strength that didn't need cruelty to prove itself. Together, he said hoarsely, we face the judgment together. Together, Melissa agreed. Aldrich gestured to the guards. Escort them both to the shrine chambers. They'll be held there until dawn. Separately, he added, when Reuben opened his mouth to protest, we can't risk the bond influencing the moon's decision. As the guards moved to surround them, Melissa caught Reuben's hand one last time. Whatever happens, she whispered, I don't regret this. Any of it. Neither do I, Reuben said, memorizing the feel of her hand in his. Then the guards pulled them apart, leading them to separate chambers to await the moon's judgment. And in the sky above, hidden behind storm clouds, the full moon began to rise. Patient, knowing, ready to reveal the truth that would change the kingdom forever. Dawn broke cold and silver over Cinderfall Palace. The moon goddess's shrine stood at the highest point of the kingdom, an ancient circle of white stone carved with lunar phases, open to the sky, where the moon's light touched earth even in daylight. Reuben was brought there in chains. Not iron, those could be broken by an alpha's strength. These were silver, burning against his skin. A reminder that the council trusted nothing about this judgment. Guards flanked him on all sides as they climbed the 1,000 steps to the shrine, his ceremonial robes replaced with simple white linen, the traditional garb of those seeking divine judgment. The shrine was already crowded, council members in their formal regalia, foreign alphas who'd arrived for the treaty signing, their eyes gleaming with curiosity and calculation, high-ranking nobles. And surprisingly, dozens of omegas from the lower keep, standing at the edges of the circle, despite guards' attempts to turn them away. Kira stood at their front, her chin raised in defiant solidarity. Then they brought Melissa. She wore white like him, her dark hair unbound and flowing past her shoulders. No chains held her. They'd learned silver burned her skin even more severely than it burned Reuben's. But she didn't need restraints. She walked with quiet dignity between her guards, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found his. In that moment, despite everything, Reuben felt the bond flare between them. Alive. Unbreakable. "I'm here," her eyes said. "So am I," his answered. Elder Thorn stood at the shrine's center, before the ancient altar carved with the moon's image. His voice rang out across the assembled crowd. "We gather under the moon's witness to judge a matter of divine law. Alpha King Reuben has defied his council in defense of this Omega, Melissa, claiming their mate bond is sacred and unbreakable. The Omega herself claims to be Moonborn, blessed by the goddess with power that rivals kings." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "But power without divine sanction is corruption," Thorn continued. "And bonds that override rejection are chains, not blessings. Therefore, we invoke the ancient judgment. Let the moon herself decide. Is this bond divine will, or is it dark magic that must be purged?" Aldrich stepped forward, holding an ancient silver blade. "The ritual is simple. The Omega will stand beneath the moon's light. If she is truly moonborn, blessed by the goddess, the moonlight will embrace her and her power will stabilize. If she is corrupted—" He let the words hang. "The moonlight will burn her alive." Reuben lunged against his chains. "You didn't mention that part." "Divine judgment isn't meant to be comfortable," Aldrich said coldly. "Step forward, Omega." Melissa walked to the center of the shrine, to the circular platform where moonlight, somehow visible even in dawn's early light, pooled like liquid silver. She looked small standing there, mortal and fragile, despite the power Reuben knew burned inside her. "Any last words?" Thorn asked, though his tone suggested he didn't care. Melissa turned, not to the council, but to the Omegas gathered at the shrine's edge. "I spent my whole life believing I was meant to be invisible, that my worth was measured by how well I could disappear." Her voice carried clearly through the cold morning air. "But the moon sees us, all of us, even when no one else does." Kira pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Melissa stepped onto the platform. The moonlight surged around her like a living thing, and she screamed. Silver fire erupted across her skin, burning, consuming. She fell to her knees as power she couldn't control tore through her in waves. The shrine's stones cracked beneath the force of it. Several nobles stumbled back in fear. "She's being rejected," Aldrich shouted. "The moon herself cast her out." "No." Reuben's voice cut through the chaos. "She's transforming." And he was right. The fire wasn't destroying Melissa. It was revealing her. Silver marks spread across her skin in intricate patterns, ancient moon runes that glowed with pure lunar light. Her eyes blazed silver white, and when she stood, power radiated from her in waves that made even the Alphas step back. "I am Moonborn," Melissa said, her voice layered with something older. "Vaster. Last daughter of the Lunar bloodline, hidden, protected, awakened by rejection that should have broken me, but instead made me whole." The moonlight intensified, a beam of pure silver descending from the sky despite the dawn sun. It wrapped around Melissa like a mother's embrace. And then the moon goddess spoke. Her voice was everywhere and nowhere, ancient, feminine, absolute. It resonated in every wolf's chest, undeniable as their own heartbeat. "This one is mine. Blessed by my hand, born of my light, chosen to restore what was stolen." The council members paled. Several fell to their knees. The Moonborn were not eliminated by divine will, but by mortal fear. By alphas who craved power over balance, domination over harmony. I allowed their extinction, waited for the time when one would rise again. And she has. The goddess's attention turned to Reuben, and he felt the weight of her gaze like the moon itself pressing down on him. Alpha King, you rejected my gift out of fear. Do you reject it still? Reuben's chains shattered, not broken by force, but simply dissolved by moonlight. He stood, walked across the shrine to where Melissa stood wreathed in silver fire, and did something no Alpha King had done in 4 centuries. He knelt, not in submission, not in defeat, in recognition of an equal. I reject nothing, he said clearly. I was wrong. I chose fear over faith, politics over destiny, but I'm choosing differently now. He looked up at Melissa, at the power blazing from her, and saw not a threat, but a partner. I choose her. I choose us. I choose love, even if it costs me my crown. Melissa's eyes, still blazing silver, filled with tears. Reuben, I don't care what it costs, he continued, speaking to her now, only her. I don't care what the council says, what the kingdom demands, what tradition dictates. You are my mate, my equal, my choice, and I will stand beside you, or I will fall defending you, but I will never walk away again. The bond between them flared, white-hot, complete, unbreakable. Melissa reached down, taking his hand, pulling him to his feet, and when she kissed him, silver light exploded outward in a wave that swept across the entire shrine. The moon's voice rang out one final time. The bond is true, the match is divine, and those who sought to destroy it. The goddess's attention turned to Aldrich and Thorn, and both men stumbled back in terror. We'll answer for their corruption. The moonlight focused on the 2 council members, revealing silver-black shadows clinging to them like rot. Marks of dark magic, of forbidden rituals meant to suppress the Moonborn bloodline. They used blood magic, someone in the crowd whispered. They've been manipulating the lineage for generations, another realized. Aldrich tried to run, but moonlight pinned him in place. We were protecting the kingdom. You were protecting your power, no more. The shadows burned away, and when the light faded, both Aldrich and Thorn lay unconscious on the shrine floor, their corruption exposed for all to see. Silence fell across the shrine. Then Kira began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster, louder. Other Omegas joined her, then Betas. Then, surprisingly, several of the foreign Alphas who'd been watching with calculating interest. The applause grew until it was thunderous. The moon goddess's presence began to fade, but her final words echoed through every heart present. A new age begins. Let balance be restored. The moonlight withdrew, leaving Melissa standing radiant but exhausted in Reuben's arms, the silver mark still glowing faintly on her skin. An elder counselor, one who'd stayed silent throughout the trial, stepped forward, her ancient eyes kind. By divine decree and moon's witness, Melissa of the Moonborn is declared blessed, and by that same decree, she held out a silver circlet, simple but beautiful, carved with moon phases. She is offered the Lunar crown. Will you accept? Melissa looked at Reuben, then at the crowd. Then at the Omegas who'd stood witness to history changing. Only if the kingdom changes with me, she said. No more hunting Moonborn bloodlines. No more suppressing Omegas. Balance means equality, or the crown means nothing. The elder counselor smiled. Agreed. She placed the crown on Melissa's head, and the kingdom had its first Moonborn Lunar in 400 years. The coronation took place 3 days after the judgment, giving the kingdom time to process what had happened and begin the work of transformation. Aldrich and Thorn were stripped of their positions and exiled to the borderlands, their corruption exposed for all to see. The investigation into their blood magic revealed generations of manipulation, systematic suppression of Omega rights, deliberate weakening of Moonborn bloodlines, and political machinations designed to consolidate power in the hands of a few Alpha families. The remaining council members who'd been complicit were removed. Those who'd stayed silent out of fear were given a choice: support the new order or step aside. Most chose to stay. Change was coming whether they welcomed it or not. Melissa stood before the great mirror in the Lunar's chambers, rooms that had been empty since Reuben's mother's death, adjusting the formal crimson gown that had been tailored specifically for her. The silver lunar crown rested on her dark hair, feeling both foreign and somehow right. "You look terrified," Kira said from the doorway, smiling. "I am terrified." Melissa turned from the mirror. 3 weeks ago, I was a seamstress in the lower keep. Now I'm Luna, Queen of Cinderfall. How did this happen? The moon had plans. Kira crossed the room to adjust Melissa's collar. And you were brave enough to let them unfold. I didn't feel brave. I felt like I was drowning. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, dear heart. It's moving forward despite it. Kira stepped back, her eyes shining with pride. Your mother would have been so proud. Melissa's throat tightened. Her mother, who'd died believing her daughter was meant only to serve, who'd never known about the Moonborn blood running through their veins, suppressed by generations of blood magic. I wish she could see this, Melissa whispered. Maybe she can. Kira squeezed her hand. Now come. The kingdom is waiting. The throne room had been transformed. Where once only nobles and high-ranking wolves had gathered, now Omegas stood alongside Betas, servants beside soldiers. The foreign Alphas who'd witnessed the moon's judgment had stayed for the coronation, their presence a sign that Cinderfall's transformation would ripple across the werewolf world. Reuben stood before his throne, not sitting, but standing beside it. When Melissa entered, his eyes found hers immediately, and the bond between them hummed with warmth and recognition. She'd worried, in quiet moments, whether the bond was real or simply moon magic forcing them together. But the way Reuben looked at her now, with wonder and love and something deeper than magic, dispelled those fears. This was choice, on both sides, made freely, despite the cost. The ceremony was brief. The elder counselor who'd offered Melissa the crown spoke of balance restored, of the moon's will made manifest, of a new age beginning. Then she turned to Melissa. Do you, Melissa Moonborn, accept the responsibility of Lunar Queen, to lead beside your mate as an equal, to protect the weak, to challenge injustice, and to honor the moon's gift with wisdom and compassion? I do, Melissa said, her voice steady. And do you, Alpha King Reuben, accept your mate as your equal, to rule beside her, not above her, to honor her counsel, respect her power, and build a kingdom of balance rather than domination? Reuben smiled. I do, gladly. The elder counselor raised her hands. Then by the moon's blessing and the kingdom's witness, I declare you bound, not just as mates, but as partners in all things. May your reign bring the balance our people have been denied for far too long. The crowd erupted in applause, but Melissa barely heard it, because Reuben had crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her forget they had an audience. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Reuben whispered against her hair, Are you ready for this? Really ready? No, Melissa admitted, but we'll figure it out together. Together, Reuben agreed. Always. The new laws were drafted within the week. Omegas were granted the right to refuse unwanted bonds, the right to own property, the right to hold positions of authority. Forced submission was outlawed, and any alpha caught abusing Omega wolves would answer directly to the Lunar Queen. It wasn't perfect. Change never came easily, and there were those who resisted, who clung to old hierarchies and ancient prejudices. But for the first time in centuries, Omegas had a voice. And that voice was backed by a Lunar Queen who understood their struggles intimately. Melissa threw herself into the work with fierce dedication. She established schools for Omega children, created guilds where they could learn trades beyond servitude, and personally oversaw the investigation into other suppressed bloodlines. Reuben watched her transform from the invisible seamstress he'd rejected into a queen, who commanded respect not through fear, but through unwavering integrity and genuine compassion. And he fell in love with her more deeply every day. 1 month after the coronation, Melissa found Reuben in the palace gardens, staring up at the moon. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, settling beside him on the stone bench. "Too much on my mind." He pulled her against his side, grateful for her warmth in the cool night air. "I keep thinking about the rejection, how close I came to losing you forever. But you didn't." Melissa took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "The moon had other plans. Do you ever regret it, being bound to someone who hurt you?" Melissa was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret the pain, but I don't regret where it led us. You rejected me because you were taught that love was weakness. But through that rejection, we both learned that love is the opposite. It's the strength to be vulnerable, to choose someone despite the cost, to stand together even when standing alone would be easier." Reuben pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't deserve you." "Good thing the moon doesn't care about deserve." Melissa smiled. "She cares about balance, about what's right, not what's easy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the moon's face. The bond between them was settled now, no longer burning with desperate intensity, but glowing with steady warmth. A partnership forged not just in passion, but in respect, trust, and genuine understanding. "I love you," Reuben said quietly. "Not because the moon demands it, but because you're remarkable. Strong and compassionate and brave in ways I never understood until I almost lost you." "I love you too," Melissa replied. "Even when you're being a stubborn alpha who thinks he has to carry everything alone." Reuben laughed, the sound lighter than she'd ever heard from him. "I'm working on that." "I know." She kissed him softly. "We both are." Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of Cinderfall Kingdom, they would point to the moon judgment as the catalyst, the moment when divine intervention forced change upon a resistant world. But those who'd witnessed it knew the truth. The change didn't come from the moon's command. It came from an Omega who refused to break, and an Alpha who finally learned that strength meant standing beside your mate, not above them. It came from a bond that survived rejection because it was built on something deeper than magic or destiny. It came from love. They said the Alpha King would reject her quietly. They said Omegas were meant to bow their heads, accept their fate, and disappear. But no one warned him what would happen when he rejected his true mate, or what the moon would demand in return. He rejected her as an Omega, believing her beneath him. He rejected the bond, thinking it would die. He rejected destiny, convinced he knew better than the moon herself. He was wrong about all of it, because Melissa wasn't just an Omega. She was Moonborn, the last of a sacred bloodline, blessed with power that rivaled kings, and a spirit that refused to break even when torn apart. And the bond between them? It didn't die. It transformed them both. In the end, Reuben didn't just accept Melissa as his mate. He knelt before her as an equal, chose her above his crown, and rebuilt his kingdom into something worthy of her strength. He rejected her as an omega, but the moon never did. And in that refusal, in that divine insistence that some bonds transcend mortal fear and political calculation, two broken souls found themselves whole, not through magic, not through force, but through the simple, terrifying choice to love, even when it cost everything, especially then. The end. If you loved Melissa and Reuben's journey from rejection to redemption, let me know in the comments. And subscribe for more stories where destiny refuses to be denied, and love rewrites the laws that tried to break it.